Welcome to the New Life Podcast. Today we are going to continue looking at Ruth and looking at Ruth chapter 2 and how it applies to our lives as Christians today.
Perfect. So I'm excited to get into Ruth chapter 2. I enjoyed our first chapter for sure, talking about it and just how it applies to us. But before we get started, I have a question for the both of us. Whoops. And it's, if you could master any skill immediately, what would it be?
I would say either being able to play the piano or the guitar. Is that your answer?
Definitely one of them.
Yeah.
I'll pick a different one.
Yeah, I would say one of those two. Yeah. I knew at one point how to play the clarinet. I don't know if I could do it anymore.
Yeah. It's like you have all these options and you pick the clarinet.
When you're picking it for band. It's not like piano and guitar are not options for band in school.
But there's other instruments I feel like that would easily apply. Like the harp.
That wasn't an option either. But when I went to the music try-in thing or tryout thing, it was my options were trumpet or clarinet. Those were the two that they were you could probably do these.
Oh, they didn't think you could do any other one?
Well, I wanted to do flute and I tried it and I couldn't do it. And so then they had you try other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the top two that they were that it just seemed like it would naturally I could kind of do what I needed to. But those don't really translate into more practical instruments. But if I could learn, I'd pick one of those two.
You would think if someone knew how to play the piano, they would do it. They probably have a piano or a keyboard now. You didn't have a keyboard at all for marching band?
No, marching band was a little bit different. Sometimes we did, but that was just specifically marching band. But if it was just concert band, you wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And then winter percussion, we sometimes did because anytime there's a keyboard, they kind of got thrown in with percussion.
Yeah. But
it was never part of the standard band setup. Yeah. At least when I was in school. It might be different now.
Then can you imagine if that was if band had those instruments that anybody could do? It probably because they probably take longer to really pick up and learn. So
most of the time, the people who did end up doing those parts, they've been playing their whole lives.
They already knew how to play.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna probably say that too, only because I think that is the most practical skill to have that could translate just across the board.
Yeah.
But I would probably say welding.
Oh, that'd be fun.
If I can master and be a master at it.
Yeah.
For one, you make good money if you're a master at it. And then it would just be, you could just weld your own stuff.
You could make sculptures if you wanted.
Yeah, you could be an artiste. Yeah, but then I'd have to master two skills.
Yeah.
You'd have to be a master welder and a master artist. So you only get to pick one.
You only get to pick one. Darn.
Now if I asked the question a little bit different and I said that you could only be a master at one skill, you can't be a master at any. So if you're already a master at anything, you have to lose that skill.
That's tough.
Yeah, so you'd have to think of it. It'd be like cooking or something.
Yeah, you would need something that's more
survival.
Survival or could make you money maybe
Yeah, or both. All right, so we'll pick it up. Ruth chapter 2. That's where we're gonna be. So if you are somehow following along, hopefully you're not doing that in the car.
Yeah, please Bibles. Don't pull this up.
But we're gonna see really how what transpires after the events of Ruth 1. And what happened in Ruth 1 is really we saw the relationship between Naomi and her daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, or however you want to say that name. But we see this relationship, and it's a beautiful relationship. But the reason why we see it is because that they lost their husbands. And not only Naomi lost her husband, but she also lost her sons. That's how she has these two daughter-in-laws. And they have such a beautiful relationship. But now because of the death of their husbands, Naomi realizes, she's probably in a place that's not a good place to be, right? They probably should never have left to begin with. We talked about that last week. Mm-hmm. But now she's all alone. And for a widow, that's not good at all, to be all alone. And she's older too. So she's not going to have an easy time finding a husband, because that husband's going to want to have children. And probably Naomi's old enough where she's probably not likely going to have children, or that's what her thoughts are, I'm sure, at the time. So she's like, I'm going to go back to Israel. I'm going to leave Moab, and I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. And then we see her tell her daughter-in-law, stay here, right? You don't sacrifice your lives for me. You two are still young. You can find husbands. Go find yourself a husband. Go find yourself a husband of your own tribe, nation, whatever. And marry, have kids, and all those things. Well, Ruth wasn't having it, right? Mm-hmm. She's like, no, I'm not leaving you. Right, there was something about Naomi that Ruth loved so much that she was willing to sacrifice everything she knew in order to follow her, and that's where you see the famous line, like where Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go." Mm-hmm. Right, where like I'll follow, all those things. Mm-hmm. Where you stay, right, and she even goes to the extreme, like to death. Right, mm-hmm. This is how much she cared for Naomi, and Naomi basically realizes it's a lost cause. Right, I'm not going to convince her to stay. So Orpah stays, which made the sense to stay. But Naomi decides to let Ruth go with her back to Bethlehem. And they get there, and you can really see that Naomi is really downcast, right? She's really sad at the end of chapter 1. She feels like the Lord has afflicted her in some way. And maybe he has in some way in order to bring her back. It's hard telling because it's not really what the story is all about. But we're going to find out what is God going to do with Naomi and Ruth when they get back. So that brings us to chapter 2, starting in verse 1 through 3, which says, Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, Go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Yeah.
Right, I was going to say, you're going to keep going.
I was going to keep going. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting section, and I think we see like two very prominent people. We see Boaz, and then we see Ruth, which, I mean, my Bible titles it Ruth meets and Boaz meet. So you know that they're going to be important in this section, but I think focusing on Ruth first, we see in this like just couple of verses that they've been in Bethlehem for a little bit, and she decides that she wants to go find work. Probably to take care of herself, but also to help take care of Naomi. And so she decides to go and glean in the fields. And gleaning is like a pretty common practice at this time. And I feel like we see it referenced all throughout Scripture, whether it's like people are gleaning or they're using it as like an analogy or a metaphor. But during this time, it was a practice where widows and orphans and even the poor could go and gather grain left behind after the harvest, basically as a way to get food without directly like working as a harvester. And a lot of this came from like a command in Leviticus 19 that kind of outlined a little bit more of like how this worked. I know you looked into that a little bit more. What did that say, like Leviticus 19?
So it talked about like, it was basically this, it's almost like it was welfare for them. Like they didn't have a welfare system, but this is how God instructed the people to take care of the poor and the needy. And it was a good program that was happening because it still required the people to go out and get it. Which was interesting because it allowed them to keep some of their dignity, right? You weren't just getting a handout, and back then that was a major thing, right? You would feel real downcast, like it was a bad thing if you were in a place where people had to give you things in order for you to survive in your basic necessities in life, food and water. But in this way, you still could keep your dignity. You still felt like you were working for it, and you would work, and it would take all day into the
sun
evening
up to sundown
to get the grain and the stuff that you needed to provide for your family when you were in that type of situation. I think it's interesting because the command literally tells harvesters to like cut corners when they're harvesting. Leave some behind. Don't get all of it, right? Leave some of the grain behind, some of the harvest behind, so people can go behind you and glean and take what they need. And then there's actually a command that if it would hit the ground, you weren't allowed to pick it up. So if you were to drop it, it was a command that you are not allowed to pick that up, that those that needed it could glean and come pick it up off the ground and then be provided for. And that's how you would take care of the poor and the needy.
I think that's interesting too, because it almost like it's this command, like you said, set up to help the poor in a sense, but also in the way that it's instructed, it almost seems like it's also to benefit the workers as well, like almost as a way to like have this mindset of not being greedy. Because I feel like so often you're like, well, I'm doing the work, so I'm going to get as much as I can, put in all this work, and it's all for me. But to like have to almost train yourself to be like, no, like don't take everything. Like if you drop it, no, you have to leave it. Like it kind of like makes you really think about what you're doing as well too, even if you're not the person who maybe like needs the extra help.
And I think it's interesting because here we're learning about this guy named Boaz, and there are really three main characters of this story, and it's Naomi, it's Ruth, and it's Boaz. Boaz, it says here in my translation, says he's a man of standing. Some translations say he's a man of like great wealth.
Yeah, mine says a man of noble character.
Yeah, and the word that's being used there is not always necessarily for like a rich man or a wealthy man. The idea almost is like a knight, right? A knight in shining armor. A knight who comes and saves the day, a man of valor and honor. Things like that, and that's the kind of guy we're going to realize Boaz is, even in chapter 2 and later on through these coming chapters with their relationship building between Boaz and Ruth. But I think it's interesting because the only way that he could have gotten to this point, which we're going to find out too, is that he was a man blessed by God. He didn't get there on his own standing, and he probably realizes that even himself. That because remember there was just a famine, right? It would have taken a long time to get to a man of great wealth after a famine because you would have lost all your stuff.
Yeah, especially given the work that he was doing.
Any food that you would have built up, even if you did build enough up to survive the famine. And more than likely, Boaz was a man who was generous and would give to those that needed it as well. He would have been at least not in a point where he would have a great wealth. But we see that he was blessed by the Lord and blessed by God too. That he had plenty, right? He had plenty for not just Naomi and Ruth, but you see, he had workers and servants that he provided for. He made a lot of the right choices. All right, he had the same choice as Naomi and Elimelech did when they decided to go to Moab, but he decided to stay. And I think that gives us at least hope. If we can draw anything out of this first part, it should at least remind us that it's always more beneficial to stay in the Lord's hand, even during difficult situations. And especially, like, this was their promised land. And that's what we talked about last time in the first chapter of Ruth, is that they were leaving Bethlehem, which literally means the house of bread, right? It's the land God provided for the people, the land flowing with milk and honey. Even in the time of famine, they ought to have at least come to a realization that God was going to take care of them in that land, not in a different land. And praise the Lord, God is drawing them back and probably even helped them in the land of Moab, but with an intent to bring them back to the land that God had given them. But we also see this kind of interesting thing with, she says in verse 3, so she went out and entered a field, and then in the field belonging to Boaz, right? Just by happenstance, right? Well, we have the privilege of reading into the story, right? We know that it's not by just chance, right? To to Ruth and Naomi at the time,
yeah, you're just like, this is a
it's a luck of the
yeah.
luck of the draw, right? But God is working, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't by chance. It was God moving. It wasn't just. And this should teach us really that nothing really happens by chance or luck or whatever. That God orchestrates all life, right? He is the author of all these things, right? He puts all things into motion. And I think that's important to know because it keeps us from running away, right? When things get difficult or things get hard and you feel like maybe the grass is greener on the other side. Well, it's never greener on the other side. It's always greener wherever God has you, even if it looks difficult or hard or whatever. Even, during the time of the famine, like I had mentioned before, is that Ruth is about to see the supernatural hand of God in a really generous way. And that gets us to verse 4.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a longer section. We're going to be looking at verses 4 through 13. It says, Later when Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they replied. Boaz asked his servant who was in charge of the harvesters, Whose young woman is this? And the servant answered, She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, Will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters? She came and has been on her feet since early morning, except that she rested a little in the shelter. Then Boaz said to Ruth, Listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, and don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they are harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? When you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars that the young men have filled. She fell face down, bowed to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor with you, so that you notice me, although I am a foreigner? Boaz answered her, Everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and mother and your native land, and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. My Lord, she said, I have found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant, although I am not like one of your female servants. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, looking at this section, verses 4 through 13, I think this part is really cool because we only get like a brief introduction to Boaz in the first 3 verses. Like, we know he's family in a sense, but just seeing this brief interaction between Boaz and his workers, Boaz and Ruth, we really get this good picture of like his character, which is really cool. I mean, even just in verse 4, we first see like his relationship with his workers. Like he comes in, and although we don't get a lot, you can imply that he must have a good relationship with them because they have like this very friendly like interaction, which I think speaks volumes to just who he is as a person. Also, I mean, we continue down and we start to see that he's someone who knows the Lord. Verses 4 and 12, you see him talk about the Lord and like who he is and how, one can seek refuge in him and that the Lord is faithful. So then we get this idea, okay, he's a man of God and he knows who the Lord is. And he continues to reflect that even in his character when he's protective of Ruth. I mean, he could have easily just been like, oh, it's another person in my field. But he takes notice of her and then makes sure that the men aren't going to mess with her, that she is working with the other females, that she's provided for. And then I think finally in verse 13 we see, and Ruth says this to him, she says that he's a comforter and encourager. Like we see this moment of Boaz is almost treating Ruth in a way that like God treats us. And so he just is this good depiction of like God's going to take care of us. He's going to provide for us. He's going to be our refuge when we need him to, because there's love there. And so I think just with these interactions, we see so much of who Boaz is. just from very small moments.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important too to make sure we highlight with what we're talking about here, because it is the way God treats us. Mm-hmm. It is the way that when we think about our relationship with the Lord, we may ask the very similar thing as Ruth asked, like why me? Like why are you blessing me the way that you're blessing? Why are you showing me so much grace and generosity, and all those things
she's
that
like
God
very
does?
visibly confused almost by Boaz's like interactions with her because of who she is. She's a foreigner and a widow. She's like, you're not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. But that's, like you said, this is where we start to see the character of Boaz. That I believe, even at this time, though there may be some, there's not even really the relationship is just in the beginning, right? They don't know each other. They don't, but he knows about her, right? And that's sort of what he says here. He says, I know what you've done, right? I know how you've taken care of Naomi and left your people to come with her, and all those things that we just read is important because it shows us that Boaz is, like what you said, a man of God. And I think this is important for all the guys listening, because again, this is a love story, but there's more in it than just love, but it is a love story. So those of you that may be young men who are seeking after someone to fall in love with and have a marriage with before God and do life together, I think it's important that I think the first character trait you ought to be striving for is to be a man of God, because it speaks volumes, right? You don't have to. A person doesn't have to lavish all the gifts if they first start with being a man of God. I think Boaz was in a place to give generously with his fields, but we all have the power that if we put God first in our lives, to act generous to all the people. And that's not just with Ruth. We see it, I'm sure, even with his workers, like what you were talking about. Is there's a demeanor that hopefully every business, every leadership, whatever it may be, strives to be, where you can go to your staff, or those that may, your volunteers, those that may be under you in authority, and say things like the Lord be with you, and then they would say the Lord bless you, right? That's a relationship that is a good one, right? It's a thriving one. It's one that sacrifices for one another, and again, that should be our relationship, not even just with our spouse, but with our whoever may be under us in authority, or vice versa. Maybe you have someone that's in authority, right? Give them respect. Ask the Lord to bless them. All the things that we see, the character traits here. But Boaz really tells Ruth I want you to stay, right? I don't want you to go to another field. Well, part of the reason why is because she wouldn't be safe if she went to another field. Not maybe she would be safe, but her chances were slim if she decided, right? Boaz almost is saying, like, maybe not quite this way, but this is the way I see it. Right? You're lucky to pick my field, because who knows what would have happened to you if you picked someone else's field.
Yeah. It's like you would like to assume that like no one would take advantage of her or whatnot, but it's like even Boaz is like, no, I made sure that the men knew, like, to leave you alone, but also he's like almost putting things in place of like, stay with the girls, like I'll keep an eye on you, like all will be good. And I think that shows, like you said earlier too, like he obviously cares about the people who are in his fields, because most workers would have been like, it's just another person in the field. Like they wouldn't probably spend that much time worrying about it.
And if we could draw a picture between being in Boaz's fields to being in God's field, it's the same idea of what he's telling Ruth, right? Where you find companionship with the other women, and you find protection, where he tells haven't I commanded the men not to touch you? It's the same thing that when we are in the field of God, when we're in the hands of God, or however you want to picture it, we find companionship and fellowship. We find protection, but we also find satisfaction, right? He tells her, don't be afraid, basically. Don't be afraid to go get something to drink, right? When you're thirsty, drink from the jars that the men are filling up. And I think that's important to understand because Boaz is Boaz's field can be a good picture for us when we remain in God's field, right? When we leave God's field, that's where these three things, fellowship and protection and satisfaction, begin to dwindle away. Or you may find it for a moment, but you have no security that it's going to stay, right? With Boaz, Ruth can have a sense of security and a sense of assurance that she's going to be taken care of. And that's what Boaz is trying to get her to understand. That, Ruth, if you stay with me in my field, you're going to have what you need. Not only for you, but we're going to find out you're going to have enough for Naomi as well, the one that you're trying to provide for it. Because that's the sense you get with Ruth, right? Ruth is doing the hard work, right? She's not getting a handout. If you think that's what she's doing, read between the lines what Ruth is actually doing, right? It says she went out to work. Yeah. She worked all day and into the evening.
Not only went out to work, but even in that first chunk that we read, it mentioned, like, she almost wanted permission to be doing the work she was doing too. Like, I think it said something about, like, how she had asked, like, can I do this? It's like she wants to work hard, but also not just take advantage of someone's kindness.
Yeah, and I think it's a good model for us when it comes to working in all facets of the Christian life, because it can be tempting. And think about Ruth's situation for a minute. It could be tempting to say, finally, someone saw my hard work and someone saw what I feel like I deserve, and now I'm getting what I deserve. That would be the wrong way for Ruth to be looking at this. In fact, she says again the exact opposite, right? Why extend this to me? Why extend the kindness and the grace and the compassion, and just the list goes on? Why do that for me? That's the attitude we have, an attitude of humility when it comes to doing anything in the kingdom of God. We should always be asking the Lord, I think, Lord, why me? Why are you using me for this specific thing? Not saying things to the Lord, though you may not say them exactly like this, but you may do it with your actions. Saying things like, finally, Lord, you saw all the effort I've been putting in, and you saw finally, you saw everything I'm doing. Finally, I'm getting what I deserve. Well, we know what we deserve in the Christian life, but God gave us the exact opposite. This is exactly what Ruth is recognizing, is that she doesn't deserve this. She's a foreigner, but yet Boaz is giving her these things. And I think it is an awesome picture of God's grace in our own life. And that if we stick to God's field, that's where we find fellowship and protection and satisfaction in all facets of our life.
Yeah.
But verse 14.
You want to read it?
Yep, it's my turn to read. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread, dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her, and pick up reprimand her, even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town and gave her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Struggling today.
As I say, that was a rough reading section, but that's okay. So looking at this section, to me, what really stood out was verses 15 through 16. I mean, it was a little tiny section compared to before. But again, it just really continues to show us who Boaz is. So not only has he been generous to Ruth in the sense of she's working in his field, he's making sure she's taken care of with her, like having water and making sure she's safe. But then we see him even go like above and beyond this command of even just what's said in Leviticus 19, where he's like, here, you can have even more. Like, how about you go behind these men? And then like he almost wanted them to intentionally like leave stuff for her to pick up. But it's kind of like the way he's doing it is almost sweet in a way, because it's like he could have just said, here, I'm just gonna give you this grain. He could have given her like even the prepared grain and was like, just take it, go back to your family, and not even had her do any work. But he, I think, sees her like willingness to want to work and doesn't, like you said, doesn't want to make her a charity case. He wants her to be able to have that dignity, and so he sets up this scenario where she can get more, but in a way where she can still have the ability to work for it. Which I think just kind of shows, again, just such like an admirable character trait of just how much he cares for not only Ruth, but just probably people in general, because he's willing to give her more than was expected.
Yeah, and I think like we mentioned the passage Leviticus 19, where this part's talked about the gleaning and providing for the poor, that type of stuff. He didn't have to do this.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
This is completely different, right? It's one thing to allow someone to do it because that's what the law says to do, even though people still didn't allow people to do it, right? They disobeyed what God wanted because, like what you said, it was a sense of greed. No, I worked for that. I need that, right? That type of mentality. But Boaz, basically, you almost get this picture that Ruth is out of the picture at this point, right? It's almost as he whispers over the table.
It's like she ate and then left or something.
That'd be like, hey, guys, I want you to leave more for her. And not only that, let her pick from the harvest, right? Not just the leftovers, right? Let her get the good stuff, right? And because that's sometimes what happened with, like, you would leave the bad stuff on the stalks. You would leave the bad stuff on the ground for the poor and the needy to come, because you weren't going to use that stuff anyways.
Yeah.
Well, this is not what Boaz is doing. He's not giving Ruth the bad stuff. He's giving her the stuff that they're getting, right? The same idea. And here we get this picture now. If we didn't so much get it before, is that maybe Boaz is a little bit sweet on Ruth.
You're like, aw.
They're, and maybe not quite yet, but it really does seem like, okay, he wants her in his company, right? He wants her around. This is why I think he continues to tell the men to provide for her. And like you said, I think it is really cool that he could have easily just gave it to her, right? Just loaded up.
That would have definitely been a very romantic way to be like, here, I want to win you over. Here's everything.
So men, think about this. Use Boaz as an example. That don't give your wife like a ring or whatever. Hide it somewhere so she has to go find it, right? Or work for it, right? You do
maybe a little different. But
no, okay, don't do that. That's a bad idea. But it is really cool, I think, that Boaz still wants her to keep her dignity, because I think Boaz realizes that's who she is, right? She wouldn't want a handout.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have got up.
Yeah, she already took the initiative
and went out to glean these fields if she didn't want to get the food, right? And not only that, what we see towards the end that I think is important to catch is she still did all the work, right? There's more work than just collecting the harvest, right? There's beating the stalks, getting the grain, all that stuff. That's, again, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know how all it works, but I know at least from the Bible, the idea is like there's a threshing floor and like you're beating the stuff off, and
it's hard work.
It's she did it, right? That's what it says, right? She did the work with those types of things. And then we see her too. I always thought this was interesting, but we're going to see it here in the next verses. Why? Where she eats until she's satisfied, and then she takes what was left and she keeps it, right? And most of the time you didn't really do that. You just left it there, or somebody else ate it, or whatever it may have happened. You didn't like put it in your pockets. Like that would kind of be weird, I think. I mean, think about if you're going to eat at somebody's table and you're eating with them and you're satisfied, you're full, and then you just start shoveling. That probably wasn't quite like that. Yeah. But even what was left on the plate, right? You just slipping it into your purse or your pockets or whatever. Yeah. But why did she do that? Well, we're going to find out. Well, she did it for her mother-in-law. That's the whole idea really of all this.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth loves her mother-in-law so much that she wants to make sure she's provided for.
Mm-hmm.
And if Naomi can't be in a spot where she can find a husband and be provided for, or at this point doesn't realize there's a next of kin, or feel like there's nobody else to take care of her, Ruth is like, I need to take care of my mother-in-law, right? I'm young. I can go and glean these fields. I can go and work and provide for the basic necessity food for us to eat. So I think that's important when we're thinking about who Ruth is, right? The character of Ruth. And all these next coming chapters, I want us to compile this idea of these character traits of Boaz and Ruth. And we already seen glimpses of Naomi, and we're going to see even more. But really, mainly the two people, which is Ruth and Boaz. See how they are, and ask yourself, how can I be like them? How can I model their character? Because they are godly character traits. Even if Ruth maybe not even realizing it at the moment, on how God is using her in this moment, not only for, because sometimes I think we think of the opposite, and not that it is not there, it's definitely there, is Ruth and Naomi going to Boaz is obviously like a better thing because they're the ones in need. Yeah. But we're going to find out how much Boaz needs Ruth, right? And Boaz probably doesn't realize it as well. So there's going to be a beautiful picture here in the coming chapters for sure about that. But maybe you're asking yourself, well, what's an ephah of barley, right? How much is that? Is that a lot? Did she get a lot? Well, it's about 5½ pounds of barley, or gallons of barley. So it's like a tub of barley, which is a lot for someone who you didn't get that much gleaning off fields. She got plenty for Naomi and herself to eat, for sure. So I think that's important. Like, it wasn't a little, it was a lot. So that's important for us when we get to these next verses, because we're gonna see Naomi's reaction to it.
Yeah. So verse 19 to the end of the chapter says, her mother-in-law said to her, where did you gather barley today, and where did you work? May the Lord bless the man who noticed you. Ruth told her mother-in-law, whom she had worked with, and said, the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may the Lord bless him, because he has not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead. Naomi continued, the man is a close relative. He is one of our family redeemers. Ruth the Moabitess said, he also told me, stay with my young men until they have finished all of my harvest. So Naomi said to her daughter-in-law Ruth, my daughter, it is good for you to work with the female servants, so that nothing will happen to you in another field. Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law.
All right. That's chapter 2.
That's chapter 2. Very eventful little section here. And I like how these verses too, like you mentioned earlier, that we really have 3 characters. We have Naomi, Boaz, and Ruth, and we almost get a little bit deeper glimpses of each of them in just this small section. But Naomi kind of becomes the highlight of this part. And I think it's because we see such a difference in her character from the Naomi of chapter 1. Because when we see her in chapter 1, she's really like upset. She's really bitter. But in this section, you see her have this shift where she starts praising God and acknowledging who the Lord is. And not that she forgot that in chapter 1, but something's different now. Like verse 19, she's talking about, like, she wants God to bless whoever showed Ruth kindness. Like, she doesn't even know who the person is, but she's like, clearly, like, God has done something great. Like, someone has really provided for you, because she comes in with all of this barley that we talked about in the previous section. But then once she finds out who it is, that it's a family member who's shown kindness, then she's like, okay, I want the Lord to bless Boaz for what he's done. So you see how her words have really shifted from bitterness to praise, because she's kind of starting to see how God's plan is unfolding in these moments, where in chapter 1 she was probably questioning a lot of like, why did God do this? Like, what's happening? And now she's like, okay, wait, this is what's happening.
You know, I think it's so interesting because I think we can look over this one. I'm a person, I like to see like what does the Bible talk about these certain things. And you see this example throughout the Bible about how God takes care of widows, which is important not only because widows still exist, right? That's not a foreign thing. Wives lose their husbands all the time. Now we have things in society now that can help take care of widows and those that are elderly that may have lost their spouse and things like that. Not that it's any more, easier or whatever. But back then it was a lot different, right? Once you lost your husband, you're poor.
Yeah.
Unless you're young and you can get another husband. You didn't really have anybody unless you have family. Well, here we see Naomi's excitement like skyrocket from where we've seen it, like what you're saying in chapter 1. And you almost can picture it for just a minute. And we should picture it for just a minute because Ruth is coming home, right? Remember at the beginning, she's like, I'm going out, I'm going to work, we'll see what we get, right?
Yeah.
That's basically the idea. You don't know what you're going to glean. You don't know. You could go to a field and they may have nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not like there's just you got to walk to these fields. Hopefully you pick some fields that are close to each other. But maybe you couldn't. Who knows where they're living is exactly and where the areas are that have fields. But you see this important part because, again, Ruth is coming home with a lot of food. So not only are you excited about that, but then Naomi is questioning, where on earth did you get all this, right? And that's the idea of what we see. This is why she's asking you, whose field did you go to that you were able to get all this?
You almost kind of think about it too, with given the circumstances of a famine, like you almost imagine maybe there was like a surplus of people. You're like, there's no way you're gonna come back with that much, even if you find work, because there's probably like a surplus of people who are in need at this point.
Yeah.
Who are probably doing this whole gleaning process.
For sure, not the only one.
Yeah.
Gleaning at this time. There's just no way.
Yeah.
People were hurting for food. They're probably still rebuilding and
so she's like, even if you
harvest.
do get something, it's probably going to be like such a small amount. But then she comes back with pounds of.
Yeah, and then she asks, where'd you get all this? And then Ruth tells her. So you got extreme excitement because now you have food, right? And you didn't really have, or you didn't have very much of it. That's why you got to go glean. Now you see Naomi's excitement skyrocket because Ruth tells her who it is. And there must have been just something that clicked in Naomi that maybe she never even thought about this at the time that, oh, wait a minute. This person's related to my husband, which means in my translation, it calls him a guardian redeemer, right? Or family redeemer. Yeah. Well, there's other titles too, which is the idea, like what we were saying, is that person legally, now we're going to find out in the next chapter that in Boaz's case, it doesn't matter if he was or wasn't. He was going to take care of him anyways.
Yeah.
But legally, they had now someone that was going to take care of him, right? There's a sense of security again, a sense of assurance that we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? And you think about the anxiety and the thoughts that Naomi must have been running through her head. And maybe Ruth had them as well, but I feel like Ruth seems a little bit more optimistic. Maybe not, though. It's hard to tell with the limited stuff. She has a very
trusting attitude, I think, of just like whatever's going to happen, it's going to be okay kind of mindset.
But you have to think that Naomi didn't want Ruth to come in, and now she's probably in her head thinking, well, how we're both going to be starving and hungry and on the street and begging and gleaning off fields. Like, you didn't want to do that. But, praise the Lord, you could do it, but you didn't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
So you think about the excitement that Naomi had to be feeling in this moment. And I think we see it by what she says about Boaz, which she says, may the Lord bless him, like the Lord bless him. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a proclamation of God again in her life. That remember she was saying, like like bitterness and like the like my name means bitter. Like she changed her whole name.
Yeah.
That's what Naomi was feeling. Right. I'm
Yeah.
not Naomi no more.
Yeah.
I'm bitter. Right. Because the Lord has afflicted me. Right. The Lord has cast his hand on me or whatever you want to say there. But now that whole demeanor is changing because I think Naomi is finally seeing the Lord working in her life. And maybe it's been a while since she's seen that and felt that since they've left and went to Moab, and now they're back, and now she's starting to see God work and God do some awesome things. And then I think it is kind of funny that basically Naomi's like, you gotta stay with this.
Yeah. Like you can't lose this job.
Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening, really. She's not going to be really gleaning anymore. Yeah. Right? She's going to be working.
Yeah.
She's going to be working with the other
female servants.
Right? Yeah. So now she's got a job. Right? Now there's even more of a sense of security and assurance about where their food's going to come and how they're going to be taken care of now more than ever. And she says, like, you got to stay with them, right?
Well, that's what I love, too. It's like Naomi, like, in a sense, she's like, you can't just not go do this job. But she's also encouraging Ruth. But then you just continue to see how Ruth just has this, like, attitude of, like, working hard. Like, she wants to work hard and, like, wants to provide and take care of Naomi. Because not only does she, like, obviously go back and continue working with the female servants, but it makes a point to say, like, she worked the fields for the barley harvest and then the wheat harvest. So, like, she, like, stayed even longer and just continued to work. And I think that just shows, too, so much of, like, Ruth's, like, character of, like, she's going to continue to do what she needs to do to take care of the people that she loves. And in this case, it's Naomi. But Naomi's, like, also encouraging her, being like, please stay. Like, this is a good job.
We need this.
Yeah.
But I want to just highlight this one piece, and I may be looking into it, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But it says at the very end, right, it's kind of abrupt.
It's very, very
and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Yeah.
That's how it ends. Why say that? Because I think, well, we're going to find out in the next chapters, because many female servants and male servants, they lived on the fields. And I think there was an essence where Ruth could have lived there. Right, she could have stayed there with the other female servants and the workers that are there, but she chose not to. Now, again, maybe I'm reading into that, but I think that's there for a reason to let us know that she still chose to live with Naomi rather than where she could have been like, all right, I'm good to go. Right, I got a job and I'm going to be taken care of. But she said, no, I'm staying with Naomi. Yeah. Right? I'm still going to provide for her, take care of her.
Like, she's staying faithful to what she told Naomi when she agreed to come with her anyways.
Yeah, so and that's important for us to understand is it can be tempting, and the devil often tempts us to leave people behind for the pursuit of success or the pursuit of something that you desire or want or even need in life sometimes, whether that's a good job or whatever. Sometimes the devil would love you to leave people behind for the sake of your own desires and needs. But this is showing us that no matter what, people ought to be our focus, right? And that's scattered throughout the Bible, that the souls of people are always more important than the harvest field, right? And it always will be. People are always going to be more important than food and water and even your basic necessities. And when you forget that, that's where society breaks down and people start going after what they feel like is right and wrong and things like that. That's when those problems end up happening, when you forget that we're called to be believers who look after each other, right? And that's what Ruth is doing with Naomi. And they're going to find out how important this guardian redeemer really is in the coming chapters, in chapter 3 and chapter 4. Mainly chapter 3 is where we're really going to see it. But even in chapter 4, we're going to see how God wraps it all up. So make sure you tune in for sure with those chapters, because we're not done with this amazing plan that God is doing.
Like, we're still in the beginning of it.
Doing with, again, the 3 characters, with Naomi, with Ruth, and with Boaz. And we're going to find out, and we'll probably talk more about it next week. Or not next week, when we do this next one, next month. About how important this guardian redeemer is, not just in the lives of Ruth and Naomi, but in our life as well. So any final thoughts?
I think for me, it's just when looking at this, and specifically with Boaz, you see so much of who he is in the way he acts and the way he treats other people. And I think that's just a really important reminder to us that obviously it's important to know the Bible and to know the Word of God and to share that with people, but also something as simple as just the way we treat people, no matter their circumstances, can be a reflection of Christ and his love. And we see that through Boaz. And I think that just is something to be mindful of, are we living in a way where people can see God's love and see who God really is through our actions and how we're treating them? Because with Boaz, you could see God. He's reflecting God in the things that he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that concludes our episode of Ruth chapter 2. If you like this series that we're doing through the book of Ruth, let us know. Like the episode, comment down below. Comment a question that maybe you'd want us to answer in the beginning, a fun question, or, even a serious question. Any question is fine, and we'll try our best to answer it. But we thank you guys for always listening and watching. Make sure you subscribe so you keep up to date on all our episodes. And as always, thank you for watching the New Life Podcast.